This is Twit.
In Toronto, and I'd like your opinion on this, Georgia Dow, Quayside, which is on the waterfront, Alphabet has purchased 12 acres to create a smart city. Actually, The Intercept calls it a smart city of surveillance. It's a joint government effort. The government agency is Waterfront Toronto and Google's Sidewalk Labs. They're going to build the city from the ground up. Are you familiar with this and the controversy over it, Georgia?
Yeah, talk about like Google got rid of the don't be evil and they just went with be creepy. So, yeah, people are talking about it. It's one of those things that they really like pushing like if you take a look on the site, you can see all of these like really high marketed about how this is going to be amazing and, this is going to have accessible public services and, it's going to be all wonderful and fabulous and you're not going to have any more problems with, self-driving cars and no traffic and everything's going to happen. But then you kind of take a look at all of the other systems where it talks about having like an identity manager system and asking people that want to work for the company about like, what do you think about elections in Canada and how are they going to change with time?
Yikes.
And their lack of transparency in how they're going to be dealing with this is really very scary. Like it's like one of those, they try to make it this utopian thought of like green roofed condos and like, like rainbows and unicorns, where really it's like this dystopian Orwellian thought of how now Google is going to be tracking everything you do, when you use your cards, when you go to the hospital. And the weird thing for this is that, when you use an application, at least you have those terms and services that no one reads that you have to then give up all of your rights for. But how do you do that for a city? Right. You just suddenly go into there and now they're tracking you because they own this part of the city. But how clear is that? Like, do you have to swipe a card or use your fingerprints so that you can go in? And it's scary to me, yeah.
There's a precedent for this. Disney created a place called Celebration, right, in Florida, which was a Disney-designed city. They eventually kind of, I think, got out of it. But on the one hand, I understand this is a really good example of how technocrats think about politics in the world. They think, and they're not wrong necessarily, that technology can solve a lot of problems. And if we only had full control, Larry Page said, I wish we were on an island so we didn't have this government interference thing. Remember that when he said that at Google I/O? They feel like if you just let us handle this, we can make a utopia. But with all these government regulations, just get in the way. All these zoning restrictions, privacy restrictions. And on the one hand, I kind of understand why Toronto might want to try it. It's only a small part of the waterfront, right? It's a part that's kind of not very attractive, industrial. There's some interesting stuff here. It's not all of Toronto. Toronto's a very diverse and lovely city because of its diversity. It's got not one, but 2 Chinatowns. I mean, it's an amazing city. So what if 12 acres is devoted to this experiment?
It's the transparency, though. It was not done transparently. People had to fight so that they could actually find out what was happening in the first sets of terms of service or whatever contract that they had set up with Google. And they weren't, like, every time that the politicians and the people for the company were asked about it, they wouldn't say what would happen with the data, who would have access to it, what type of data would be tracked to that. And so they didn't start from this place of being exceptionally transparent and telling us what was going to happen and what wasn't going to happen. They only did that under duress. And that always is that little red flag of like,
what if only people, it's like Celebration, only people who wanted to live in the Google world moved there and kind of gave their permission?
But what if you're born there? Do you get a Gmail address on your birth certificate?
Yeah, that's different.
You have to leave? Like now this area is off limits.
Point.
This is now for only special people that get to use that. I don't know. I think that they chose Toronto because Canadians are known for being a little bit more complacent and easygoing. Sorry to say.
Yeah.
What happens if you're born there? You get a Google issued birth certificate.
Yeah. No, well, you're still you're still a Canadian.
When you're a baby, you sign the terms of service with your finger, I guess.
Dual citizenship in Google World.
Google.
Yeah.
I do want to say, as someone that sat on a lot of like local government meetings and commissions lately, I do think there is a role to play with technology working better with local municipalities. Like we were talking about automated vehicles earlier in the show. Something I didn't really think about until I started running for office is people with mobility issues and how much they're going to be relying on this. That's going to require things like zoning certain lanes to drop in, pick up passengers. We need to start thinking about the protocol for how we design roads. Maybe we want to put sensors on the side of it to kind of give an auxiliary warning beyond like camera data and GPS data about where the edges of where you can drive are. There are issues that we need to start working with cities on. And one of my issues, like I think The Intercept, where the story comes from, I think it's a good, they do good journalism overall. But like Leo, as you're doing stories on Twit, something I've always noticed is you take a second and you think about the other side and you give it. And I find The Intercept to be so reactionary that they really don't try to get another. It's like they've decided how they feel going in and they do really good investigative journalism on it. I think this idea could be done well with oversight and with permission from the community, but I would agree with you, it was handled very poorly here.
Well, let me give you the other side from an opinion piece in the Globe and Mail by David Fraser, who is a privacy lawyer that was hired by Sidewalk Labs to, he says, navigate the intricacies of Canadian privacy law. And he points out, he says that the questions about privacy didn't begin with Sidewalk Labs. Most Canadian cities, and by the way, this is true in England too, and I suspect true in the U.S., are full of sensors, and we have no idea what's there, what they do, what data they collect. Each municipality that puts in those sensors is convinced they comply with the law, but they're not transparent. There's little accountability. He says what we're doing at Sidewalk is much more transparent and accountable than the norm in Canada. And so he reassures people, just wait, watch. Of course, this is a legitimate concern. That's why I, as a privacy advocate, was hired by Google. And we think we're going to do it right. And you hold us to a high standard. So I think that that's another way to look at it. He says a lot of the data that they're talking about is things like weather data, pollution data, pollen count data, traffic counts, energy consumption, recyclables, and things like that. Not necessarily personal data. So I think I think it's reasonable to be concerned. I think you're right. The Intercept is a little knee-jerk sometimes in these issues. And yeah, there's both sides of it. I'm not going to move to Celebration, Florida, because I don't want to live in Disney's world. That's truly dystopian.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think it's interesting to hear at least attempts. This is really the problem we have in general, which is that I think Silicon Valley has a certain arrogance. And technocrats in general have a certain arrogance about and I'm going to say our intelligence and our ability to solve these problems. And we look at politicians, and I did this on the committee, and it's such a slow, arduous process. Let's just cut through this. I know what we should do.
Yep.
And I had that experience serving on that digital committee in the city of Petaluma. It was a real pain in the butt.